last year, I embarked on a road trip to visit my family. I planned to leave after work and estimated that I would have about a 7-hour drive ahead of me. As most of the driving was going to be on freeways, which are typically easy to navigate, I figured that I would get there at around midnight. I was looking forward to spending quality time with my loved ones, catching up on old times, and having a good time. Things were going smoothly for most of the journey, until around 10 or 11 p.m. I was still a couple of hours away from my destination and found myself driving through a remote and rural area with wilderness on both sides of the freeway. By then, there were only a couple of other cars or trucks on the roads, making it feel like I was the only person in the world. Despite having directions on my phone, I was also listening to music on it through Spotify and Bluetooth. That's when I heard a voice from my phone's direction system announce that there was a road closure up ahead. I realized that I would be taking a detour, which would add more time to my journey. However, at that point, I was still a couple of miles away from the closure, and I hoped it wouldn't be too long before I could get back on track. Driving through this area was starting to get quite unsettling, as I was driving through a really rural area with hardly any streetlights or houses in sight. The wilderness seemed to go on forever, and the quietness was eerie. As I continued driving, I couldn't help but think about how isolated and exposed I felt. I tried to focus on the music, which was a welcome distraction, but it wasn't doing much to ease my anxiety. I felt a slight annoyance, but I hoped the situation wouldn't take me too far off course. Soon after, my music abruptly stopped, and I realized I had lost service. Given that I was likely driving through a dead zone, I wasn't too surprised. After a few more minutes, I reached the detour and took an exit onto a quiet, narrow road that felt like it was in the middle of nowhere. As I drove, I relied on my phone's directions to guide me. It said that I would be on that road for 3 miles. But shortly after, the map itself stopped working completely. I wasn't getting any kind of a signal at all. I kept driving and tried to take the logical route that would lead me back to the freeway. After a couple of miles, I started looking for left turns. The first one that I saw, I took. I figured that this was the road that I was supposed to take. This road, much like the last one, was very quiet. I was going much slower now, and it was very dark. After maybe 5 minutes on that road, I thought that I saw something up ahead. When I got closer, I slowed down significantly. There were grass fields and woods on both sides of the narrow road. But in the middle of it, up ahead, was a giant branch. It looked like a tree branch that had just fallen off and was covering almost the entire road. The trees weren't really hanging over the road, so it seemed a little bit odd. My car came to a stop, and I figured it wouldn't be too hard to move the branch out of the way. It didn't look very heavy, just big. When my car stopped, I was right about to open the door when I saw something. I glanced to my right for some reason and spotted a man emerging from the woods, around 30 feet away, heading towards my car. I sensed something was off and felt the urge to leave the area immediately. I reversed and made a U-turn, speeding away from the scene and returning to the previous road. I drove for about 20 minutes until I regained some cell phone service, then called the police's non-emergency line to report the man. Although I was delayed by approximately an hour, I arrived back safely, but the image of the man emerging from the woods stayed with me. I'm convinced that he placed the tree branch on the road as a trap to lure people out of their vehicles. I hope that nobody else fell for his scheme. My very best friend, Samantha, and I took a road trip to the Grand Canyon a few years ago. It was an amazing experience. That would be well worth the approximately 12-hour travel to get there. We had the idea that the Grand Canyon would be an intriguing place to visit, and since we had always wanted to travel there, we decided to take a road trip there. The journey was scheduled to be completed in a single day according to the original plan. We had a head start, and it was going to be a simple trip, especially considering there were two of us and we could take turns behind the wheel. In the end, we got going at 7 in the morning, and I took the wheel. Things, for the most part, went according to plan. We made a few pit stops along the way to get gas and some lunch. In addition to that, we switched drivers around every 2 hours. At one point, maybe 7 or 8 hours into the trip, we pulled out of a petrol station, and shortly afterward, Samantha informed me that the automobile that had been following us was now in front of us. Driving had just become my primary occupation, although I was oblivious to this fact. I would simply be on my phone when I was in the passenger seat, and I wasn't really paying that close of attention to where we were or what was going on around us. When I asked her how she knew that, she explained that the automobile in question had been following us for a long while she was driving and had even switched lanes with us a few times. I was surprised by her response. As we stopped, the automobile stopped as well, and when we drove away, the car drove away at the same time as us. Of course, she wasn't completely certain, but she did notice that both events occurred simultaneously. She had the impression that there was something fishy going on. I suggested that perhaps it was just a coincidence, and both of us acknowledged that this was a possibility. As I was driving, I occasionally glanced in the rearview mirror at the vehicle. It was a white sedan with 4 doors and had an appearance that was very typical. It was impossible for me to determine who was driving or anything else of the sort. I spent most of the time driving in the right lane, and the automobile that was following us stayed in that lane behind us. We paid it little attention, and none of us could say for certain whether or not we were being followed, but it did have an eerie air about it. After almost an hour had passed, we looked back and saw that the automobile was still following us. I had shifted lanes several times in order to pass slower cars and other vehicles, and I had also kind of forgotten about the car that was following us until I remembered it once more, at which point I observed that the car was still there. It was a respectable distance away. It wasn't as if it was stuck to our bumper in an obvious way. Samantha instructed me to take the next exit, and we would find out once and for all if the automobile was following us for some reason by observing whether or not we took the exit. After waiting for about 5 minutes, the next exit became available, and I took it. The automobile that was following us did the same thing. We were at the point of fear now. I was at a loss for what action to take. Once I had traveled some distance along the road, Samantha instructed me to make a right turn at the next intersection. As I did it, the automobile that was following us did it as well. After that, I started making erratic turns to the left and right. Whatever I did, the car continued in the same manner. I have absolutely no idea what city we were even in at the time. It wasn't quite in the middle of nowhere, but neither was it a very large place either. After passing a few shops dispersed around the area, I entered a residential neighborhood at some point. Because I was turning so frequently, the car that was following us eventually gave up and went its own way. We made a turn, but the automobile continued in its original direction. At that time, I checked our GPS once more, and after that, we headed back in the direction of the motorway. We were both very relieved when the car decided to stop following us, since it meant that we did not have to worry about it any longer. That same day, we were able to make it to the Grand Canyon. After spending the previous 2 nights in a nearby town in Arizona, we made our way back to our own residence. When we were traveling back home the following day, I noticed a white automobile following us for a second time, this time somewhere about the middle of the trip. Samantha and I laughed at how the automobile had circled back around and was following us again. We were completely joking about it because we were well aware of how common a car that was. There was no way that it could have been the same one. However, after about half an hour had passed, we looked back and saw that the automobile was still following us. We had to acquire gas, so we got off at the next exit. After we did that, the automobile continued to pursue us. At that point, I had another unsettling sensation. What if it turned out to be the same car? We eventually arrived at a larger gas station that had a sizable number of other vehicles parked in the lot. It appeared to be a popular pit stop for people on their way to or from other destinations. After driving the car to a petrol station, I exited the vehicle and went inside. We took notice of the fact that the white car did not stop for fuel but instead parked in the lot. While I filled up the petrol tank, Samantha remained vigilant over the vehicle. After I had finished what I needed to do, I went back inside, and Samantha informed me that no one had gotten out of the car. We were both feeling the need to use the restroom, so we got out of the car and went into the gas station to use the facilities there. Nevertheless, as we were entering the building, we heard the door of a white car open and close behind us. When we turned around, we saw a man getting out of the vehicle. Samantha and I took the same exact amount of time to go back to our car and get inside of it. We spotted the man start walking back to his car at the same time that we did. After getting into the car, starting the engine, and accelerating as quickly as I could, I left the parking lot as quickly as I could. The driver of the white car that was following us in the parking lot had to travel a further distance before reaching the exit that we were using. Because the person had to hold still for a semi-truck that was pulling in, we were able to successfully escape the area. Once we re-entered the freeway, I drove up to the first exit and then exited there to ensure that the other vehicle would not be able to catch up to us. We waited for a while at yet another petrol station, and then we continued on our way. Following that, we went the rest of the journey without coming across the car again. Samantha and I continue to have frequent conversations on this topic. It's hard for me to imagine that the same person followed us again in such a short amount of time. There are moments when I find myself wondering whether or not we have been followed the entire time without even realizing it. A few months ago, I went on a road trip. This event took happen while I was driving back to my house, and I was by myself at the time. It had been a very long day of driving, and it was becoming very late in the evening. I was planning to stay the night in a motel and then make my way back home the following day. My original intention was to get to the hotel about 10 o'clock at night, but the storm that had been raging for the majority of the day significantly slowed me down and prevented that from happening. Even though it was almost 11 o'clock in the evening, I was still an hour and a half away from the hotel. I'm not entirely sure in which city I found myself. I was just going down the freeway when I heard that. By now, the roads were very quiet. I had plenty of gas, but I really had to go to the bathroom. I started keeping my eyes peeled for an exit coming up, and a few minutes later I saw one. There was a sign that said rest area. I took the exit, and when I got to it I saw that there was a parking lot with a smaller building, some grass, and a few picnic tables. I parked in front of the building and noticed that there was only one other car there. It was a ways down from mine. I looked around the place, and it was really sketchy. The building was small, and looked kind of outdated. The parking lot was not very well lit at all. I could tell that there was somebody sitting in the driver's seat of the only other car there, and I don't know what they were doing. It almost seemed as though they were looking at me. I was strongly considering not using the bathroom here and driving to another place, but after debating it for a few moments, I decided to just go inside. My mind was probably making more of this just because of how things looked. I opened my door and got out. I walked up the sidewalk to the building. As I opened the door, I heard the guy get out of the car that was in the parking lot. I cringed when I heard this. I just had a bad feeling about it, but it was too late for me to go back to my car now. I walked inside into the bathrooms, which were just to the left. I used the restroom, and as I was washing my hands at the sink, I heard footsteps approaching right outside the bathroom door. I expected the guy to enter, but the footsteps seemed to stop right outside. It seemed as though the man was right on the other side of the door. I didn't leave. Instead, I walked back over and went inside one of the stalls. There were about 4 or 5 stalls, and I went into the second one. I closed and locked the stall door. About 30 seconds later, the man entered the bathroom. When the guy got inside, he walked right over to my stall. He then tried opening it. I was really creeped out. There were 4 other open stalls, and this guy was trying to get into mine. What a weirdo. After trying to open the stall, he didn't say anything. He just stood there, right outside of the door. I could kind of see him through the slim crack. I wanted to just get out of there. I grabbed some toilet paper, a big wad of it. When I did, I compressed it into a ball. Then I tossed it over the top of the bathroom stall into one of the other ones to the right. Right as I did so, I burst open the door, which pushed the man back. I was able to get past him, but didn't get a whole lot of distance away from him before he started chasing after me. Luckily, I had created just enough of a distraction to get past. When I made it out of the building, he was maybe 15 feet behind me. I ran to my car and got inside. I shut the door moments before he arrived and tried to open it. I locked my door, then started my engine and drove off. When I got back to the road, the guy didn't bother to drive after me, which I was glad to see. Of course, I had to call the police and let them know what had happened. I didn't want somebody else to pull into the rest stop and be targeted by that guy like I was. Hopefully, they found him before he left, but I never heard if they did or not. You